it's a culmination of a number of thoughts that I've had over the past few years that I'm still in the process of trying to organize and formulate, and I'm hoping that it stands up to our compressed lightning round format here. But if you guys have other questions after this presentation, want to follow up on some of these ideas, feel free to approach me at any point. So the basis of all this comes from a lot of practical experiences that I've had over the years, successes and failures, and basically some thinking that I've had and concerns that I've had by issues that I've observed in various design organizations that I've been involved with. And that concern is primarily around this notion or a notion of a potential for complacency or lack of creative problem solving with the interaction design problems that we deal with on a daily basis. And it's this complacency that I see as a manifestation of our dependence on or attachment to certain accepted design patterns, some of which we may think of being anachronistic today. And a lot of this is basically stems from internal dialogue that I've had with design teams and experiences that I've seen participating in various forums, and it has a lot to do with some of the dependence on the pattern library resources that are out there on the web. And the way that I kind of think about it, pattern libraries, it's kind of like the clip art equivalent of interaction design, right? And I can't stand that stuff. So let's call this presentation part manifesto, part call to arms. But this is pretty much the issue that I intend to address today, because I think being a good designer is not about designing the easy or convenient solution, right? That leveraging a pattern library or resource may enable, but it's about finding the right solution, about finding the appropriate solution. I think everybody here can agree upon that. So I think we need to level set expectations with the design community, or maybe just the community here in this room, about this, because we've all been in these situations where there we go. We've been pressured to not reinvent the wheel, right? Either in a production meeting or a client meeting or a meeting with your engineering team or technical teams. And you're being pressured to be very conservative with your design solutions. But I think that's total crap. I think sometimes the wheel needs to be reinvented, and we need to add value to the equation here. And I just want to throw up some examples here of that type of thinking and that kind of mentality from a design perspective. So why would we want to prevent ourselves from achieving these types of solutions? Okay? So I want to start this talk off with a slide that I think I've been waiting 15 years to put up on the screen. I think this is the right environment to do that, because as Bill was saying, this isn't Kai, and like him, I don't go to that conference anymore. So let's kick this off. Boom. Uh-oh. Ooh, thank you. Yes. Excellent. I think Jacob Nielsen just turned over in his grave. He's not dead. Sorry, Jacob, if you're here. I'll buy you a beer afterwards. So, I think really what I mean to say with this is, that's a pretty controversial statement, but I just want to ask this question. Because over the past few years, I think we've seen the rapid adoption of radically new interaction behavior, right? That's some of the things that Bill was talking about over the past decade. Very exciting time for us. In fact, I think we're in a bit of a golden age in terms of interaction design before we move on to the next thing, where our interactions may become a lot more sublime, right? Some interesting technologies in the future. I think we tend to take this environment for granted because we've seen these behaviors quickly go mainstream in terms of mass market adoption. And I just want to throw a couple examples up on the screen of things that are kind of revolutionizing our environment today. And so based on this, a broad base of the population has seen a significant shift in terms of their expectations of how they interact with technology. Right? And this is due to a lot of the enabling technologies and mass market adoption of the devices that employ these technologies, right? As we see here. And these are all things that excite us, right, as designers, because of what they enable for users, right? Very compelling stuff. And I believe that we've achieved a kind of cultural critical mass regarding the expectation and acceptance of what I call the different, right? There's a willingness on the part of the user now to experience new things and try new things out. And I think we're in the situation where we have a rapid coevolution of experience, which is that which we design for, and those who experience, right, the users who consume the products that we design. So is this showing up on the slides? Yeah. Okay, so I think because of this, this whole environment, right, is being exacerbated and accelerated or inflamed by market pressure and consumer demand, and certainly more fundamentally by the highly consumeristic society that is our foundation. And so because of this, new behaviors and techniques are expected, and they are the differentiator that help our clients sell products and help get users excited about using those products. And before I move on here, I just want to recognize these ancient proto-humans, our ancestors here, and how, their amazing ability to survive and thrive with just the simplest of MP3 players. Right. It's a testament to their endurance and strength. So the benchmark of success nowadays is not so much about usability as it is about adoption or acceptance. Not that these are mutually exclusive concepts, rather that usability is really just a table stakes consideration now. It's something that we've internalized, right? But it's one of many factors driving adoption, but certainly not the only one. Another key factor for user acceptance, obviously, is desire. And maybe that, I'm not sure if it's more important, but it's something that we need to think about. And so I'm going to elaborate here with an experiment. First, let me just kind of maybe break that down a little bit. So usability, to understand the difference between usability and desire. So if I don't understand how to operate a control, right, and some of the examples that Bill was talking about, like the handle of the button, if I don't know how those things work, then certainly those things are not usable, like in the classic sense. But if I don't want to use something, right, if I don't desire to use it, then maybe that's more of a fundamental problem, right? Certainly it's a kind of usability problem, but not in the classic sense that we've been thinking about. So I want to perform a little experiment here, and I'm expecting a little bit of group participation. We're going to take a look at two things, two objects, two devices, and we're going to vote on desire. And I'm going to talk through these first. So let's start off with this. It's a golf cart. So how many people here have ever driven a golf cart? Okay, I never have because I don't golf. Well, I should clarify, I won't golf. There's a difference, right? Thank you. Thank you. So, I think this is a very easy vehicle to operate, correct? I mean, it's got a steering wheel, it's got an accelerator pedal, it's got a brake pedal. You can't get into too much trouble with a golf cart, right? It's easy to operate, even a child could probably drive it. And I want to put that in contrast to this object. Okay, this GT350, it probably has, a manual transmission, rear-wheel drive, gobs of torque, probably too much power for its own good. I'm not sure what the situation is with power steering there. But, when you drive it to the limits of its performance, right, it's a pretty dangerous vehicle and could very well likely kill you, right? So from a usability perspective, probably lower end of the scale. But I want to ask you guys here, which one of these objects would you prefer to have? This object? Right? Raise your hands. Who would prefer to have this? Oh, you're just being contrarian. But I appreciate the sentiment. And then we have this vehicle here, Anne Margaret lookalike notwithstanding. Who would like to have this vehicle? Including the Anne Margaret lookalike? Any more? Okay. Just kidding. So I know what you're thinking. This isn't an apples to apples comparison. These are two different use cases that we're throwing here, but rest assured, not too many of you know me very well, but if I was given the opportunity to drive that GT350 on the golf course, I'd do it in a second. It'd probably be the only way I could actually have fun golfing. Probably get thrown in jail at the same time. That's quite all right. So I think my main point here is that engendering desire in users, given the environment that we designed for today, right, requires us to explore unorthodox solutions to help reinforce that. All right, let's move on to the next section here, and we've got tradition. So I think we can all agree that technology affects the design process in predictable and unpredictable ways. And this is kind of bread and butter for us as interaction designers, because that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the constraints of input and output and trying to make the right connections for users. We understand that technology affects design either by the constraints or capability that a given technology presents to the designer, or how a technology may impart an aspect of itself into that which is being created, right? So these effects can be observed as artifacts that manifest themselves in a myriad of ways, right? The point is, and I'm trying to make, over time, the origins of these artifacts are often lost, forgotten, or sometimes just ignored. But yet they persist and even become expected due to the process of enculturation. So I'm going to repeat that. these artifacts persist and even become expected due to the process of enculturation. And I want to just show an example of this. And we have here an antique typewriter, and this is the keyboard of that typewriter. And I'm not going to get into a discussion about the origins of QWERTY, but I want you to look very closely here at the arrangement, the spatial arrangement of the keys, right? The interface for this device. This device both has input and output. Notice the offset of those keys. That offset is there to make room for the lever that actuates the keystroke, which makes the mark on the piece of paper, which provides the display feedback. So obviously the designer of this interface was working against some mechanical engineering constraints that manifested this type of solution. Okay, so I'm going to put up another example, and I think maybe a few of you might be familiar with it. If you're not, I may be a little scared. Okay. So this is what I want you to look at here. The offset of the keys between the top row and the bottom, or the second row there. I think actually in the device, the bottom two rows are perfectly aligned, but I think the question you have to ask yourself is, why is that offset there? To accommodate your well-established, motor memory, from touch typing skills from your desktop or PC to your handheld device. Obviously not, because you're typing with your thumbs or using some other technique. And certainly Apple had to design a lot of workarounds to make that small keyboard layout work for users, right? There's predictive text entry, there's a lot of visual feedback. It's a pretty effective solution, but this type of manifestation of design is pretty interesting to me, because I'm always wondering why those things are there. And maybe as homework, while you guys are here at IxDA over the next week or so, or a few days, take a look around you at the objects that you interact with on a daily basis, and try to think about the conventions that are being used there, and try to understand where those conventions came from. So that basically we can see that our adherence to many common interaction design patterns can be viewed within this same type of context. I think the problem is that designers have been enculturated to accept these patterns as orthodoxy, right, without understanding the underlying context from which they were derived, right? So maybe that person who designed that keyboard wasn't really thinking about the mechanical actuation of those keys, right? Maybe they should have. So here's a question. We might consider this a form of fundamentalism, right? It's kind of an acquiescence to design dogma without questioning that dogma. And that brings me to this notion of complacency artifacts. Okay? So complacency artifacts arise when designers blindly leverage patterns or models for convenience, even when a superior solution may be possible. Now, there's other ways to say this, and maybe we can talk about this offline. But how do we as designers avoid falling into this trap? How do we avoid complacency and achieve compelling, well-designed solutions? And so I've got 3 basic points to address this. One, you've got to look beyond the details of a given pattern or model, right? You have to grasp the underlying structure or logic that defines the operation of that pattern. In other words, you have to understand the behavioral abstraction derived from the objects that you're working with. And those objects could be a widget or a control or anything. And this kind of speaks to what Bill was talking about earlier today. It's kind of a migration from that iconic perspective into the symbolic world. And I think that's really what I'm trying to say here. Is like a lot of us may kind of bias more into that visual space, but it's highly valuable to move more into that symbolic space to create value. So, I think design patterns themselves can be very illusory, right? If you don't understand that fundamental underlying logic, you may not understand the true nature of that object and how it operates, right? So you got to get beyond the visual aspects of a particular presentation or visual interaction, because the distillation of these patterns to their essence enables you to provide new meaning for users while you venture into the unknown and move beyond blind acceptance. And in this case, sail into the unknown, map out new territory, and slay the dragon. Okay, so what value or ability does this kind of abstraction provide to the interaction designer, right? Why do you even care about this, and why do you want to do this, right? It enables a few things, right? It enables the ability to remap those behaviors to different input modalities, right? Or remap behavior across different display scale, or remap behavior to different visual interaction. All right, ultimately remapping core behavior to different or unexpected purpose. Now, why do you care about that? there's a zillion reasons, right? Think about the world that we design for today. We're just not designing for one particular instance or one particular screen scale. We're designing entire ecosystems of experience that traverse multiple platforms, right? And the only way to really effectively do that is to start thinking more at that symbolic level. So on a side note, so maybe a few of you are more designerly or come from a visual interaction background or creative background. Some of this may sound a little analytical, but I would argue that you folks are well suited to this. It's just a more focused way of thinking or a different way of thinking. So I'd like to break down a kind of my thinking in terms of the distillation process with a hypothetical example. And I've got a case study that we're going to do. And basically in that case study, you'll see me kind of thinking through the distillation of a classic mouse-driven tab widget, right, that you may find on a website or a client-side application, and use that as the basis for creating a D-pad-driven interaction method for a hypothetical like set-top box. So kind of migrating from maybe the web space into maybe a consumer electronics space and trying to add some value there. So let's start off with this tab. So everybody here is familiar with tabs, right, and how a tab object works and how that widget operates. So you've got a control region, you've got a display region. A user can interact with a certain aspect of that and affect control or affect a state change in that display region. So looking at this, let's start to think about the actual display logic that operates these things. So I put this together very quickly. You probably can't read that, but that's okay. Basically what I'm doing here is testing for various conditions and looking at state, and based on those conditions, I'm affecting a change within the system and displaying feedback back to the user, right? And so this basically is an accurate description of that visual display logic of a classic widget. Now I'm going to distill that down even further to this core logic, right? Because I want to get to a more fundamental understanding of what's happening here. So very simple case of logic here. I'm testing for one condition. If it's true, I do one thing, and if I test for another condition and it's false, then I do something else. And really, what we're talking about is kind of a this or that situation, but that's theoretically represented by this concept, which is exclusive disjunction, which is often represented by these type of operators. But as designers, right, it's very difficult for us to design interactions strictly at this basis. So in terms of my thinking, like I'll bubble back up to this level and think about that core logic again and what I can enable there. But knowing that I'm moving into a new platform that has potentially different input methodologies or input techniques, I'm thinking about the constraints and capabilities of that particular device and what kind of front-end logic I need to be utilizing in order to enable that. And the next step here I'm showing is just kind of rethinking some visual interaction based on that logic. In this case, I'm calling it, modality switching via adjacent spaces, right? Nothing too revolutionary there. It's just this notion that I have to invoke a control, right? And once that control is invoked, then I have to navigate focus between that control to change the display state. And so here I have two different visual interactions, and if a user were to see these, they may not be able to recognize them as being the same. But if we start to look at the interaction logic, we notice that in this case, just that front end piece is differentiated, and that's particularly just suited for the one input constraint that I have with that D-pad remote, while the other two components here are exactly the same, right? It's that same core logic. So the original pattern has been remade into something new and relevant, and that was enabled by this ability to kind of dive down and think symbolically about the system. So it basically wraps up my presentation. So let's get going here. It may seem scandalous to reject design orthodoxy, right? We're all accustomed to embracing certain patterns, right? But if you're willing to look deeper into the underlying mechanisms which drive those patterns, you can free yourself from the mundane and create value for your clients and for your users. And that's it, guys.